Welcome back to a study of the prophet Daniel. And today we start with chapter 11, verse 18. So much history in this section of the Bible. It's an amazing view that Daniel had of the intertestament period and the battles of all of the generals of Alexander, who was the great king, and when he died, his generals got to fighting over his kingdom, and finally there were two who came to power, a Seleucid and a Ptolemaic king. In verse 18, the angel tells Daniel that since Antiochus was told by Rome to stay out of Egypt, that he would change his policy. And after this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach by him to cease without his own approach. He shall cause it to turn unto him. In short, Antiochus would petition Egypt and Syria to merge into one nation and protect him against Rome. But Rome sends a delegation to assess the situation. They also had an expeditionary force with them, and they would not allow a single empire to unite the Eastern world. They would not allow a Hellenistic empire over there. So he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. The expansion of Macedonia and Syria, Philip V and Antiochus, had to be stopped. So this Roman delegation comes to Philip V in the summer of 200 BC, demanded he break off hostilities or prepare for war. Antiochus heard about this Roman intervention. So his new policy was to offer his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy Epiphanes. Didn't work. She's 7 years old. The marriage to be consummated when they were of marriageable age. Cleopatra would support her husband, not her father, as the angel said. And this won't happen for the glory of Antiochus the Great. The Jews would suffer greatly now as Egypt and Syria continue their wars. Jewish commentators, or Jewish communities now are scattered all over the place in Egypt and Syria. But they would be used to spread Christianity later. That's an interesting thought. Well, Antiochus the Great is rebuffed by his daughter, and he turns his attention to the isles, verse 18. He took Rhodes, Samos, Colophon, and many other islands, Jerome tells us. Antiochus annexed those islands, as he said. Roman forces crossed the Adriatic Sea and prepared for war against Macedonia, in the meantime, while Antiochus is taking all those islands. They battled Philip V at a town in central Thessaly in 197 BC. Philip had to sue for peace after he had a lot of losses. So while Antiochus is over here taking these islands, after his daughter the daughter of that person turned him down to marry his son, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes. When Rome defeated the Macedonian Philip V, she turned her attention to this Antiochus the Great and the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus is fearful that Rome could stop him. They did. He shall stumble and fall and not be found, verse 19. Antiochus the Great did a rather silly thing, I think. The Romans asked him to stop expanding and to keep out of Europe altogether. Antiochus actually disregarded Rome's threat, set his ambitions on Europe, and tried to get back the area that Seleucus I had once held, and he crossed the Hellespont into Bulgaria. He was challenging Rome, a nation that had just conquered Macedonia. In 192 BC, Antiochus the Great, the Seleucid king, landed in Greece. The Roman forces met him at Thermopylae in 191 BC, forced his withdrawal back to Turkey. Rome crossed the Hellespont. Her navy defeated the Seleucid fleet of Antiochus at the same time. And in 190 BC, Lucius Cornelius Scipio chased Antiochus back to his area. He was defeated. In 190 BC, the Roman legions met Antiochus III at Magnesia on the west coast of Turkey, and the Seleucid Empire begins its decline. There was a treaty in 180 BC that put Rome in charge. Well, Antiochus 1 year later after that treaty, tried to reinvade and was killed. And so he fell and could not be found. The peace treaty contained the facts that Antiochus was to surrender all the territory that he had attained west of the Tarsus River, and Antiochus was required by Rome to pay the bill for the war, but he was allowed to keep his elephants. But he could only have 12 boats, and he would surrender 12 hostages to be kept by Rome as guarantees that he would keep the treaty. And one of those hostages was the very son of Antiochus the Great, Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV died raiding a temple in Susa. Good noted that Polybius, an ancient historian, attributed Antiochus' losses to fortune. And Good said, why don't we replace the term fortune with the words divine providence? And you'd be right. And then Polybius would become accurate in his commentary. God put an end to this Seleucid business. Now verse 20. Here's a descendant, Seleucus the Nicator, 1120. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes and the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. We have come now to his place, Antiochus the Great, succeeded by Philopator, standing in his place. The exactor of the taxes was a man named Heliodorus. He poisoned Philopator and had been opposed to some of those who were political prisoners in Rome at the time. Heliodorus had poisoned Philopator, as I said. Well, this man is sent to Jerusalem to try to collect the taxes, but a high priest there named Onias told him to go home. That's 2 Maccabees 3, 6 through 13. Epiphanes, now you come to a vile king, learning of his brother Philopator's death, claimed the throne. He obtained the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. This guy will do everything horrible. and he called himself Glorious Epiphanes. He gave that title to himself. He's the Jews' madman. This is the little horn of Daniel 8, 9 through 14. He's a Greek, born in Athens. His father, Philopater, had traded him as a hostage to Rome in place of his own brother. He was in that Roman hostage situation, Epiphanes was, for 12 years. That probably didn't do him any good psychologically. He knew the Greek culture. He knew Roman power. He ruled Syria from 175 to 163, but he was trying to Hellenize the entire area. Jerusalem was ruled by that priest, Onias, who was the son of Simon, a very strict Jew. But there were Jewish people living there that were favoring the Greek culture they had learned down in Alexandria, Egypt. Epiphanes would think of Onias as more of a political office than a spiritual one. And Onias has a brother named Jason who offered Epiphanes more tax money than Onias was willing to give. And this Jason built a gym next to the temple. For Jews and Greeks to play in the nude there. Josephus told us that. So you have an evil man there who's the brother to the priest helping Epiphanes. 2 times Antiochus will enter Jerusalem. He will punish them both times. And his last entrance was the most brutal of all. This man wanted to be king in Egypt and Syria, according to Daniel 11:25. Let's read it. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. He shall come up and be strong with a small people, the Jews. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest place of the province. He shall do that which his fathers have not done. He's so evil. Nor his father's fathers. He shall scatter among them prey and spoil and riches. And he shall forecast his devices against them for a time. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. The king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great amount of everybody. He shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. This man, Epiphanes, wanted to be king of Syria and Egypt. He even promised a man named Philopater, who had 2 sons, that they would be put in charge of Egypt. Epiphanes invaded Egypt 4 times. The last time he got all the way to Alexandria. But the Romans sent some delegates to him to stay out of there. Epiphanes listened and retreated to Syria. But he went back through Jerusalem and he's really angry. His general was ordered to attack Jerusalem on a Sabbath day when all those people would be there. He said, no one will defend it, not that day. He then attempted to Hellenize the city. A death penalty was set in place for anyone who observed the Sabbath or the feast days. He appointed a Benjamite as the high priest, wrong tribe, you see. And note, go back to chapter 8 if you want, and look at all of the things that he did that were evil. Now, in verse 26, you're going to read about an individual. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his food shall destroy him. His army shall overflow, many shall fall down slain. The he is Epiphanes. Him. Ptolemy would be defeated. The Egyptian is Ptolemy Physion, brother of Philopater. Antiochus defeated him and took Pelusium in 170 BC, which is the gateway to Egypt. Many fell down slain. And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. So the Ptolemies and the Seleucids are at it again. And they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. And so this war goes on. Here's your sixth war. There was also civil strife in both countries between some of the leaders in Egypt and the Ptolemies, and some of the leaders in Seleucia and the Seleucid king. They seem to be saying that the army betrayed him. I think that's right. Then shall he return into his land with great riches. He did get a lot of spoil while he was there. He negotiated, and Antiochus Epiphanes did, a treaty at Memphis, or Thebes, and he adopted the idea that Philometor had in this treaty. Each king at the meeting was a hypocrite. Verse 27. Both of these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. This guy goes home now, Epiphanes does. His heart shall be against the Holy Covenant. Again, he's angry with Jerusalem. He's there again to do evil. And despite this victory and spoils, he never fully conquered Egypt. And he shall do exploits and return to his own land. He never did take all of Egypt, as evil as he was. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. He's angry again at Jerusalem. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence within them that forsake the Holy Covenant. In 168 BC, invading Egypt again, the Ptolemy brothers had reconciled, formed a government against him, and Rome would also intervene, and so he had to go back home. And he did. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, take away the daily sacrifice, and shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Do you see a statement there? I hope you do. Rome will intervene, the ships of Chittim. Epiphanes will be angry again. He'll go back into Jerusalem and do things against the Holy Covenant, pollute the sanctuary, offered a pig on the altar in the temple. Rome had been trying to maintain a balance of power among the Hellenistic states. They tried to use diplomacy and power. That didn't work. They tried to prevent the Greeks from what they did. Antiochus was so rebellious, though. Well, in a suburb of Alexandria called Eleusis, a man confronted Epiphanes, and he told him, "Stop your hostilities. But if you refuse, I know that Rome's going to declare war against you." And here we're told, and have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant. He's going to be told, Rome's after you. And this guy down there in Alexandria drew a circle in the sand. And he told Epiphanes, if you get outside that circle, Rome's going to take you. That enraged Epiphanes. Again, 2 times. He was so enraged after he was told he couldn't take Egypt that he went back through Palestine and treated them like dirt. He installed an altar in the temple at Jerusalem. He dedicated that altar to Zeus, and sacrificed pigs on it. Cult prostitutes were introduced. Jewish rites and feasts were forbidden again. And Seleucid soldiers of Antiochus Epiphanes were sent throughout Palestine to enforce these laws. Greek culture was spread throughout Judea. In 2 Maccabees chapter 7, we're told that a faithful Jew stood up and said, "We are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of God received from our fathers." And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Antiochus had his way many days. And the people who were corrupted by Antiochus' flatteries, Jewish people, helped him against their own Jewish brethren. And now when they shall fall, they shall be hoping with a little help. Many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Many of these Jews helped against Antiochus Epiphanes. You remember they'd wanted a king like the nations? They had one now. Josephus called such Jews impious and wicked. The faithful Jew was punished by sword, flame, captivity, and spoil many days. And they did exploits. Some stood up against these atrocities. And some of them, understanding, shall fall to try them and to purge and make them vile, even in the time of the end, becoming it is yet for a time appointed. This went on for a long time, this destruction and this abuse of the Jews. The king did according to his will, exalted himself and made himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined, what is determined shall be done. And so you have here some who are opposed to Antiochus, but he was opposed to God. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. In 168 BC, the Maccabees became a little help. Verse 34. Judas Maccabee, an aged priest, son, and that aged priest was named Mattathias, who had 5 sons, Judith, Jonathan, Simon, John, and Eleazar. Well, one day Epiphanes' soldiers came to their hometown, ordered Matthias to preside over the inaugural sacrifice to the gods, but Matthias refused. But another Jew stepped up and did the offering. Mattathias' sons killed that Jew, and one of the Seleucid soldiers, his sons broke that pagan altar. Mattathias called on other people to join in the resistance, and he and his sons fled to a deserted place to organize. 1 Maccabees, 168 BC. 2 years later, Mattathias died. Judas assumed the leadership, 2 Maccabees chapter 8. They begged the Lord to help his people, to take pity on the temple, to have mercy on Jerusalem, as Daniel had prophesied centuries before. Judas had several victories. The Jews gave him the title Hammer. He engaged in a guerrilla warfare against Antiochus Epiphanes. He took back Jerusalem in 164 BC. The Jewish feast of Hanukkah, still celebrated today, the feast of dedication, is about the dedication of the temple, which was cleansed and then dedicated to God by Judas and his forces. And so you're reading about this time in history of the Maccabees' revolt against this wicked king who didn't regard anyone except himself. And in verse 38 we read that in his estate shall he honor the God, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. What? How's that possible? How's that possible that he could honor the God of forces? And a God whom his fathers knew not shall be he honored with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Religion became the motivation for Antiochus to build an empire, the God of forces. Rome honored the God of fortresses. A military power. The fourth beast of Daniel 7 honored war and conquering as an incarnate right. Augustus' rival, Mark Antony, mentioned about this kind of God of fortresses and the huge battles in the Romans in human history are beginning to be mentioned here by Daniel. Kings often capitulated to Rome rather than fight. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many and shall divide the land for gain. When Antiochus is stopped with a little help, a king stands up here now who neither regards God nor man, but honors the God of fortresses. War is his God. In 50 BC and following, the Ptolemaic Empire would end under Roman rule. Egypt and even the Syrians would come under Roman rule. In his estate shall be honored the God of fortresses. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push him. The king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen. He shall enter and shall overflow. But he will enter these countries, overflow and pass over. You're now being pushed toward the end of Daniel's prophecy. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Augustine entered Judea, verse 41. He shall enter also into the glorious land. Here comes the Romans. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. And Antipater was appointed over Edom. His family were Jewish converts, but he was mostly disliked by the Jews. Antipater had been an ally with Hyrcanus for a while. And Antipater made a man named Herod governor in Galilee. Herod called himself a king. Antipater died, and Aristobulus' son Antigonus removed his uncle Hyrcanus from power. He was backed by the Parthians. In 40 BC, Herod would flee to Rome, and he successfully petitioned the Senate to name him King of the Jews, 36 BC. A Roman army helped him capture Jerusalem, and he executed Antigonus, terminated the Hasmonean dynasty. It's interesting that Herod married an Hasmonean princess, trying to gain favor with the Jews. Your New Testament will tell you that the Jews didn't like Herod. Rome came and took Egypt. He took Ethiopia, North Africa, the Libyans. Tidings of the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly take away many. Any problems that occurred down there in that area of Egypt and Syria and Palestine would be taken care of by Rome. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. He's going to rule in Jerusalem also. God's providence had moved four empires into a place where the prophecies about Messiah could occur. Herod had supported Mark Antony, his neighbor. After Antony's defeat, Herod supported Octavian Augustus, political fellow. He helped Augustus' forces come into Judea and Egypt. He was a helper in the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra. The king had won. Rome was in power. All the riches of Egypt became Augustus' riches. The province of Egypt became a personal possession of the emperor. Rome got a lot of her grain from Egypt. Rome received riches from Libya and Ethiopia. And the eastern nations, the Germanic nations, verse 44, and the Parthians were never fully conquered by Rome, but they certainly were kept out of the Roman Empire. Several Roman legions, in fact, were ambushed and annihilated at a battle in AD 9. But Rome was firmly established in Judea, in the glorious Holy Mountain, and from Persia to early Rome, Daniel has seen it all. He's seen Alexander the Great. He's seen 4 generals fight, 20 generals really fight over, several generals fighting over his territory for 20 years. 4 finally took it, and then Ptolemy and Seleucus defeated the other 2. And then they went to battle, and they fought each other all through those years. And one of them emerged in Syria named Epiphanes, the madman of Judea, who went in there and just did horrible things to the people until the Maccabees, of course, went against him. And now we come to the final chapter of Daniel, chapter 12. And we have some matters here to discuss. A large number of conservative Bible scholars take the view that Daniel 11:1 is not, is just comment on history. And they don't take it as moving toward Roman times. That'd be Brother Turner. And they like to have verse 22 of chapter 10 as verse instead of verse 1 of chapter 11. And those who take that view say that it has no significance with either the contents of chapter 10 or chapter 11. In my judgment, chapter 11 is the precursor to chapter 12. And you have here the final statements about Rome. Other scholars hold that Darius the Mede of 6:1 and Darius of 9:1 are the same person. I've already gone through those arguments with you in other sessions. But we have 2 different Darius there. Their case is based on their assumptions that Daniel chapters 10, 11, and 12 were given at one time and constitute a single unit. That raises several questions. At Daniel 11:1, we read about a Darius the Mede. But if I look at 10:1, what explanation can I give that 11:1 is not a time reference? 10:1 is in the 3rd year of Cyrus, and then 11:1, the 1st year of Darius Hystaspes. That's a time reference. Why not? Was the Darius of 6:1 the same as the one of 9:1? No. Already studied that in chapter 9, showing that the first was Igbaru and the latter was Hystaspes. 2 different eras in history, according to chapter 5, verse 31. And note 11:2 here. you have 4 kings mentioned there, and you can't find them anywhere else but in Persia. You have Cambyses, Smerdis, Darius, Astapus, and then Xerxes, the rich one. Daniel was emphasizing the 4th, Xerxes. And so, if that's not historical, I don't know how to deal with chapter 12. Is there a direct, and another question that comes up, is there a direct association with Antiochus Epiphanes and chapter 12, 1 through 3? He's been quite a large study there in chapter 11. Some think there's no connection of thought of chapter 11, 28 through 45, and 12, 1 through 3. But such a strong connection exists between 10:14 and 12, 1 through 3. That's Brother Turner. Now, that's the way he looked at it. But look at 10:4 and 12:2, he would say. A prophet, however, that I know about, no prophet that I know about ever connected Epiphanes and the latter days. Did Daniel? Did Antiochus Epiphanes live in the latter days? And so I have a question. Is there any connection of 11:36 through 45 with 12, 1 through 3? Well, yes. Latter days. The latter days to liberals is the intertestament period, when to them Daniel was written. But at that time, that's the Roman period. That's Daniel chapter 2 in the last days. That's Joel chapter 2, the last days. That's Isaiah chapter 2, the last days. That's Pentecost, Roman Empire, Acts 2. But we have conflicting ideas here. We have the premillennial, of course, misinterpretation. And so we're going to have to notice here a continuation of a discussion of the final empire in Daniel's prophecy, Rome. Michael stood up at that time, Roman Empire. Shall Michael stand up? Why? Why would an angel stand up? We have a picture of the Christ standing up when Stephen is martyred, Acts 7:56. Why? In Daniel's whole life, there is a record of a man who stood up for his people. He had spent his whole life for his people. He had prophesied, and when he saw the visions of how his people would be treated, it troubled him. He got so troubled he couldn't sleep one night, remember? Here's a man who's for his people. He prayed for his people. He wanted them to go home and be successful. They had problems. Daniel knew all those emperors of Babylon and Rome. And then he sees more trouble. Antiochus Epiphanes tearing up his people and killing his people and offering pigs on the altar. Michael stands up to encourage Daniel. Daniel, you've seen all this prophecy from Babylon to Rome. So Michael stands up. I like that. You know, our God is pictured as sitting all on the throne. Christ on the right hand of the throne, sitting. But when Stephen was martyred, Christ stood up. Isaiah said God stands to plead and stands to judge. And when God stands up, something overwhelming is happening in history or in the lives of some of his people. He stood up. Well, Michael stands up. The archangel in Daniel's presence. And Daniel adds, which standeth for the sons of his people. Michael is the archangel of Israel. And he stands up for Daniel because he had been standing up for the people. You remember he had an argument of some kind with the angel of Persia and got delayed to come to Daniel. I don't even know what that means or what that was about at all. That I don't get, of course. And maybe I'm not supposed to get it. But it's interesting what we're told there. And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the sons of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble. Uh-oh. A time of trouble? Yes. It's no wonder Michael stood up. Daniel, I'm going to show you some more trouble. Such as never was since there was a nation, even in that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, one that shall be found written in the book. The book of history shows a terrible time for Rome, by Rome, against the Jews. It's a time of defeat and resurrection. Verse 2. I like to look at that word many. That would be everyone. Old and New Testament language sometimes uses the word many to mean everybody. Some have seen verse 2 here as a general resurrection. In my judgment, he's talking about the Roman situation and the Jews. Daniel, you're going to need some more comfort because the history of the Jews is a history of resurrection and death and resurrection. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. In all of history, whether it be Rome and the Jews, or the Persians and the Jews, or the Greeks and the Jews, or the Persians and the Jews, or the Babylonians and the Jews, whoever it is, in all of that time, those who are wise will turn to righteousness and turn all others to righteousness. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people, the Proverbs writer told us. And so, Daniel, you need some comfort because the history that you're looking at will never be perfect for the Jews. But thou, O Daniel, now Daniel, you've written all of these prophecies. You told the king of Babylon he was the first of 4 empires. You told us how those other empires would end. In fact, you were there when one of them did end, the Babylonian. You were there when the Persians started. You were there when your people went home and you saw all of the troubles they had. You got a chance to look at all of the history up until the time of Messiah and all of the trouble and all of those kings and wars, 6 wars, and all of them involving the people that sat in darkness. You're looking at how God worked it all out for Messiah. Now, Daniel, take all those words and seal the scroll. What you've written, Daniel, will never be changed. Seal the scroll. What you've written, Daniel, is to the time of the end of Judaism, all the way to 80-70. Many shall run to and fro. A lot of things are going to happen in history. Knowledge shall be increased. Everybody's going to know a little more. This sounds like a statement made in the Revelation, and there's a connection between Revelation and this kind of writing, of course. And we learn that beasts and those kind of things represent evil leaders. Daniel sealed it up. John will be told the same thing about the Revelation. Seal it. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two. He sees Michael. Now there's two more. The one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on the side of the bank of the river. That's Daniel 10:4. Same thing. Michael stood up. Now you've got an angel there and an angel there, standing. Three angels, all standing. What's going to happen? So Daniel listens. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, oh, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who's standing on the water, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swore by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. It's impossible, as some have tried, to make this Levitical lineage. The survivors of AD 70 were scattered all over the empire as slaves. But this is a time and times and a half. 3.5 times is the focus of a tremendous amount of speculation. The end here for Dr. Turner was the defeat of Antiochus Epiphanes. And I know I can't extend the 3.5 times beyond Rome, because that's the end of Daniel's prophecy. Rome, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. I can't go past that. The term finished here is kalach, K-A-L-A-H. All these things shall be finished, means to accomplish. All these things will be accomplished. Ceased, all these things will cease. Consummated, all these things will be consummated. All destroyed utterly, all these things will be destroyed utterly. I can't fit that into the concept here. I do know that the outcome of these things wasn't understood immediately by Daniel. He said, I heard, but I didn't understand, so I said, Lord, what shall be the end of these things? Daniel did comprehend the trouble was for his people. That he got. Whatever this is, it's something that's going to happen to the Jews. You remember Michael stood up here. The angels are standing. They're trying to comfort Daniel. So he got the idea this is something about the Jews. Believing Jews would somehow be purified. Verse 10. Well, what's that mean? The wicked would be wicked, for they didn't understand. The wise shall understand, but the wicked won't. Brother Turner said, this is about the end of Antiochus Epiphanes. Adam Good in his commentary takes the view this is AD 70. He moves it into the Roman Empire. I'm doing the same thing. But 11 through 13 are divine commentary on verses 5 through 8. Let's read verses 5 through 8 again. Daniel looked, two, one on one side of the river, another on the other, and then one said to the man clothed in linen, here's another one here, walking on the water. Seems like you've got four angels here. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters, say, it shall be for a time, times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. Well, when did God scatter the holy people? During the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, or in AD 70. That's the commentary now. That's the statement, now the commentary. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate, set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Why did I say, at the abomination that makes desolate? When the Master was explaining to his apostles the destruction of Jerusalem, he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, stand in the holy place and see. He that understands shall understand. Matthew chapter 24. The time frame is 1,290 days plus 45 days. That's 1,335 days. 1,290 days are connected to the taking away of the sacrifice, verse 11. The setting up of the abomination of desolation. At the end of 45 days, those who endured would be blessed. Those who see Epiphanies in 11:36, and I think he's moved there to the Roman Augustus, but nevertheless, continue to see him in chapter 12. They have to. In the spring of 167 BC to December 164 BC, the Maccabees cleansed the sanctuary. It's still there. It's not taken away. Epiphanes died 45 days later in the spring of 164 BC. However, he never shattered the people. But when you look at 1136 as introducing the Romans, I can advance two proposals for the timing of this event. The abomination that results in desolation terminated the daily sacrifices of the Jews. That's AD 70. The gospel was reserved for the Jews initially. But 45 days after Stephen's murder, the gospel came to Cornelius' house. The crucifixion did not shatter the Jewish nation. Rome did. The blessing of 45 days. The Jews would no longer persecute Christians, or would Judaizing teachers plague early churches. Some have interpreted the 1,335 days symbolically as referencing God's limiting the enemies of his church. McClish and McQuiggan do that. That's reaching a little bit in my judgment. But Matthew 24:13 is in play here. Those who endured to the end would be saved, the end of the Jewish situation. When you think about Daniel and Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome, And you think about all that Daniel saw concerning the Jews. You know why he was troubled and why Michael had to stand up to help him. But you also come to understand prophecies in Revelation. When you read Revelation 1, and those prophecies were come to pass shortly, not 450 years later. The time is at hand. Well, in Daniel's case, there was a time element here too. There's something going to happen that ends Judaism when the abomination of desolation comes. Rome versus the church. Comfort for the churches of Asia Minor. The truth of the book of Revelation is limited to the churches in Turkey. The truth of Daniel is limited to 4 empires. There's a similar approach here then to the study of both books. Non-Roman people in the eastern provinces venerated Rome as the goddess Deus Romas, an inscription unearthed in Smyrna. In 29 BC, there were temples to Rome in Pergamum and Ephesus. Coins depicted this goddess seated on 7 hills. Megar, the imperial cult and Christianity. The collective state was the goddess, similar to the Daniel situation. Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. And I want to challenge you when you study this prophecy to make sure you keep all of your time elements in the framework of those 4 empires. It will help you in understanding how precise Daniel was in pointing out even 6 Syrian wars that would trouble his people. One of the things I've always gotten out of prophetic studies was how comforting it is that God is paying attention even when his people are being persecuted. May God bless you in your study of his holy book, no matter what book you're studying. Ever grow.